Hi friends, hope you're doing well. This is part 3 of the Antichrist prophecy focus. We're going to jump right into it. We're going to try to finish it out if we can, but I want to get this information in. So anyway, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, very key. So we kind of laid the foundation in the previous ones. This one is, I think, fundamental reading for anyone who wants to understand end times. And, it's one of those chapters, short, sweet, but it's got a lot of information in it. We're going to start in verse 3. Verse 1 and 2, he's kind of talking about us being gathered with the Lord. I think he's talking about the rapture event. And he alludes back to 1 Thessalonians chapter, basically 4 and 5, where he tells them about this. But our focus is on this, on Antichrist. He says, "Let no one in any way deceive you, for it will not come unless our gathering to be with the Lord, unless the apostasy comes first, and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction, who opposes and exalts himself above every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, displaying himself as being God." Again, I'm a preacher of pre-tribulation rapture. I believe that we will be here to see this revealing of the Antichrist. A lot of people say, how can you be pre-tribulational and then see the revealing of the Antichrist? I'm like, well, how you would not? The Antichrist has to be on the scene before the tribulation period, because he's the one that ushers in in essence, confirms the 7-year peace agreement of Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, which means he has to be in some kind of influential, powerful position on the scene to confirm this firm covenant with them. How in the world would he be able to do that if he's not in some kind of influential power or position? He has to already be here. And I think as Christians, we're going to know who he is, and I think we're starting to see that. I personally, like I said before, to lay my cards on the table, I think I have in a previous video, I personally think it's Jared Kushner. I could be wrong and may have to revise that, but in my opinion, he's definitely a guy who we should definitely be keeping an eye on. I think he fits the bill. He's very intelligent. He's very savvy. He's very politically, he's shown himself to understand politics. He's very articulate. He's very successful in economics. He understands the financial aspects of trade. He renegotiated NAFTA and GATT with the USMCA Act. He understands technology to a degree, especially when it plays in the aspect of trade. And he's doing that with his affinity movement, with trading of money with Saudi Arabia and Israel. And by the way, that ties him in with Israel in many other ways as well. But that one, the Abraham Peace Accords, which he was one of the chief negotiators and initiators of it, and I think will ultimately be the final one who ushers that in. That's why it's really getting little to no traction right now, other than with the current administration. But with him, it is gaining traction, especially with this new trade deal of over $3 billion that he himself negotiated to bring this in through, and $2 billion of that through Saudi Arabia, which ultimately is going to be an announcement for a 7-year peace agreement, and Saudi Arabia will be one of the key signers of that, which is very near, I think. And again, when we see that, that will be the 7-year of the tribulation, the point of 7-year peace agreement, and in the middle of it says that he'll break that. So that final peace agreement for 7 years is signed. That's the tribulation period. So it means he's going to be on the scene before that. I think we're going to see who he is. We're going to be telling people, warning people. I think that's when this video is here, trying to warn people. Hey, I think he's near. I think that's him. I think, in my opinion, he's the guy we should be looking at the most. Could be wrong, and if that's the case, we definitely look for somebody else. But in my opinion, right now, he fits the mold. He fits all the parameters that I would be looking for, especially with all the other things that I've gone over in the last 2 videos about what we'd expect to see in place with Israel, the world economic system the way it is, the establishment of the various things for the reestablishment of the temple, peace agreement itself, and who's ushering it in, who's bringing it in, who's negotiating it, all these things. He's in every aspect of that. So maybe he's not it. Could certainly be. But for me, in my personal opinion, I think he's fitting the bill. And I think that we need to be aware of that. We need to be telling other people, hey, you need to keep an eye on him in that sense. And certainly we won't be here. Jesus Christ is going to come and take us out of this world. And I think it will be after this point. And that's what he's saying here. He says, let no one in any way deceive you, for it will not come. I think that's going to be with the Lord, gathering with him from verse 1, or i.e. the rapture. And then, unless the apostasy comes first, I think we're seeing apostasy right now. Massive amount of people are leaving the church, leaving Christianity, because it wasn't something that was truly a committed faith to them, in the sense it was all about, how it made them feel, things they agree with, and that's why you see denominations breaking apart and everything else is going on, and acceptance of every kind of thing that's out there, except for the true, exclusive, all-sufficiency gospel of Jesus Christ and His atoning work upon the cross. That seems to be lost. Instead, it's all these other things. And again, apostasy, I think, is definitely taking place right now, and it will be even more so as the Antichrist comes on the scene. People will be enamored with him and ultimately give their allegiance and their worship to him. And he will go into the temple and declare himself to be God, which I think points to the fact that it had to be a Jewish person, because a Gentile wouldn't be allowed to walk into the temple and much less declare himself to be God unless he goes in there by force with an army. He wouldn't just be able to walk into the temple. I think he's going to be paramount in the reestablishment of that temple, and the temple will be built right between the Al-Yas Mosque and the Dome of the Rock, where the current western wall is at, and they will basically create a huge doorway or doorways that go right into where the temple is going to be rebuilt, and they'll tear down to ground level where the temple then will be built, and that will become, and the outer courts will be given over to the heathen, or to the various faiths. And he goes on to say that he will oppose and exalt himself, verse 4, every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat on the temple of God, declaring himself that he is being God. He's going to be that full as the Satan indwells him and gives him his power. That goes back to, again, Daniel 9:27, where it says that he's getting his power in Daniel 8, where he's getting his power, but not of himself. Daniel chapter 8. So verses 8 through 10, he says, "Then that lawless one will be revealed from the Lord, will slay with the breath of his mouth, and he bring it an end to appearance of his coming." Again, going back to Revelation 19, verse 21, or 19 through 21. That is the one who is the coming in according with the activity of Satan, with all power and signs and false wonders, and with all the deception of wickedness, and for those who are perishing because they did not receive the love of the truth, so as to be saved. Again, going back to Daniel 8, verses 23 through 25, he's getting his power from Satan himself, which is the small g, the small god, the one who's controlling the governments of this world right now. So we would expect him to see that this Antichrist figure, and if it is Antichrist, is going to be supernaturally empowered by Satan himself. 1 John chapter 4, verse 3 says, "And every spirit that does not confess Jesus is not from God. That is the spirit of Antichrist, of which you have heard that is coming, and is now already in the world." The denial of Jesus Christ is one that is an Antichrist attitude. And you got to remember, Jerry Kushner and many others have that Antichrist attitude, Antichrist spirit about him. He denies Jesus Christ. And that's why he's Jewish, because he doesn't believe in Jesus Christ. In fact, his wife converted from Christianity, supposedly, to Judaism, to marry him, for his family to accept it. That's how it's reported anyway. I'm not on the inner workings, I don't know, but that's how it's reported. So, just interesting, to say the least, that he fits, again, all these aspects of it. He's doing a peace agreement, he's wealthy, he's successful, he's in high technology, he's he's obviously not Christian, so he's going to be here if there's a rapture event. He's Jewish, so he can go into the temple. He'd be allowed to go into the temple to declare himself to be God. He could do that. Lots of things. He fits the void of the premise of what the Jews would expect to see as this guy who's ushering in this peace agreement and accords and everything else that they perceive as this messianic ideal, and he's going to be head ultimately of this final 10-leader kingdom that's going to come on the scene, which I think the United States will be the preeminent one. And remember, it says that he will rule over one of those 7 kingdoms. So he's going to be the head of it. So we should expect to see him most likely run for president and win. That'd be my guess. And then ultimately, he will then be part of this final coalition that's going to come, which means there's going to be economic instability in the United States most likely lose its dollar status, which we see crumble, and a new economic system will formulate along with this new empire of allegiance of 10 nations, 10 leaders, and 7 nations, depending on how you read it and how you look at it. Most likely 10 nations, and ultimately 3 of them are overthrown. 3 of the leaders are overthrown, and it becomes 7 kings of these 10 nations, depending on how you look at it. So, depending on how it reads. And that goes all the way back to Daniel chapter 2 and chapter 8 and so forth, but also in Revelation, which we're going to come to here. All right, Revelation chapter 6, verse 2. I looked, and behold, a white horse, and he who sat on it had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he went out conquering and to conquer. Again, he goes out, and a lot of people look at this as a sign of the end times of the Antichrist. When he comes on the scene, he's going to come on the scene seen as a liberator, as one bringing in peace, as a good guy, riding on a white horse, a conqueror. He's going to go out, and ultimately he's going to bring about war. War's going to follow after that. The red horse follows after that in the previous seal as it's opened, or the preceding seal after it goes, or the following seal after it's opened. Sorry. All right, so we expect to see him negotiating a peace agreement. We expect him to ultimately lead up this final empire. That takes us to Revelation 9:11. I'm trying to go through this quickly so we can get everything in. So I apologize, but it says they have a king over them. At verse 11 of chapter 9, they have a king over them, and the angel of the abyss, his name in Hebrew is Apollyon, and in the Greek it is the name of Abaddon, and in the Greek it is Apollyon. I believe that's Satan, personally. He's an angel. He's the one who's over the abyss. He's given the keys of it. He's thrown down to earth. Goes exactly what we see happening in Revelation chapter 12, where Satan is thrown down to earth, and we'll read that here in a second, where he's thrown down to earth, and it says, for the world to be, woe to the earth, because it's, Satan's been thrown down to you in his wrath, because he knows his time is short. But he has a key, and he opens up the abyss, and out of it comes all this demonic horde that's been thrown in there and kept for so long, and these fallen angels that come out of there. So that's, and this ultimately, this king will embody and give his power to the Antichrist. Satan is and we're going to see that when we get into chapter 13 here in a little bit. But we'll first look at chapter 11 of Revelation, and it just basically says that, verse 1 and 2, so then there was given to me a measuring rod like a staff, and someone said, "Get up and measure the temple of God and altar, and those who worship in it. Leave out the outer courts, the outside of the temple, and do not measure it, for it has been given over to the nations, and they will tread it underfoot, the holy city, for 42 months, or for 3.5 years." Okay, so again, there's going to be a temple, but the outer courts are going to be given to them, but there's going to be a temple that's going to be built, just like I just previously said. I think the temple's coming, it's going to be built. Outer courts are going to be given over to the Muslims and those who are non-believers, non-Jewish. And then he goes on, it says, and I will grant authority to my 2 witnesses, and these 2 witnesses are going to be killed, and that's where we get worldwide communications. It says that the whole world's going to see this event. They're all going to be celebrating and giving up gifts and all this stuff, but then great fear is going to take on, because they're going to see this and watching them as they rise up. Again, worldwide communications. We see that in verses 11 and 12 of chapter 11. What I want to focus on was verse 7, where it says, "Then when they had finished their testimony," these 2 witnesses of God, I think that's going to be most likely Enoch and Elijah. I don't believe it's Moses, and the reason why is that it's appointed for a man to die once and then face judgment, and ultimately Moses' body was argued over, and that means to me that he's not going to die again, be killed again, or die again. He's going to, he didn't say anything about him being resurrected, so he'd have to be there in his glorified body. That doesn't make any sense to me. So it seems to me like those who are raptured were 2, and those 2 haven't died yet, and most likely will, and I think that's Enoch and Elijah. Anyway, so he goes on, it says that, and it says, when they had finished their testimony, the beast that come out of the abyss, which we just saw was Apollyon, or I think Satan, as he's cast down, come out of the abyss, will make war with them and overcome them and kill them. So through the embodiment and empowering of the Antichrist, he's going to kill these two witnesses. And then it goes on to say that, a loud voice will be heard in verse 12, and called those two up. Then they went up to heaven in the clouds, and their enemies watched them. And in that hour there was a great earthquake, and so forth. It goes on to talk about that. But let's look in here real quick. Yeah, verse 9 and 10 actually, where it talks about those people, every tribe, nation, and tongue will look on their dead bodies for 3.5 days, and they will won't permit their bodies to be laid in a tomb. And those who dwell on the earth will rejoice over them. So the whole earth is going to have to know about this. So again, you're talking about worldwide communications, and people are going to be able to see this event, as it says they're watching as they are raised up. So again, you have worldwide communications, worldwide visual communications, talked about right there in verses 9 and 10 and 11, so forth, and then 12. What else? And then we're going to we'll look at Revelation chapter 13. Revelation 13 basically just says, we're going to look at 1 through 7. I won't read it all just because of time. Basically, it goes on to say that, verse 1, it says, and the dragon stood on the sand of the sea, blah, blah, blah. And a beast was coming up out having 10 horns and 7 heads, and on those heads were 10 diadems, 10 kingdoms, 10 leaders, 10 kings, and that these 10 kings will be headed up over, I think, a 7-nation empire, most likely. 3 maybe overthrown, who knows? But how that plays out could be vice versa too. So, but goes in conjunction with Revelation 17, which we'll come to in just a minute. And it just goes on to say that, verse 2, the beast, which I saw, was like a leopard and feet, blah, 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 blah. And it says, and the dragon, which is Satan himself, was, which we know that from Revelation 12. And the dragon, it says, where did you see that? Sorry. And it says, and the dragon gave him his power and his throne and great authority. So we know it's Satan ultimately is the one in power. Going exactly back what we read previously in Daniel chapter 8, of where he's this skilled, intrigued person at the end who's going to come. It's not going to have his power in and of himself. It's going to come from somewhere else. And it's ultimately what he's talking about is he's empowered by Satan himself. And that's where he's getting that from. Then ultimately what he's going to say, as it goes on, it says that people are going to worship him, going back to 2 Thessalonians. But then it says, and it was given them to make a war against the saints and to overcome them, and authority over every tribe and people and tongue and nation was given to him. He's going to have total world domination, and it's primarily going to be given to him through this economic control, which we see in verse 16, 17, 18, which is, everybody knows the famous verses about the mark of the beast. And it says, and he causes all the small and great, rich and poor, free men and slaves to be given a mark on his right hand and on his forehead, and he provides that no one would be able to buy or sell except he has a mark or the number of his name. He goes on to say what this is, 666. It's going to be incorporated somewhere in this. So ultimately what it's saying is there's going to be a global economic system that's going to control everybody. And guess what? If you don't agree or go along with the program of worshiping him, you can be turned off. And if you're turned off, guess what? You can't buy, sell, or trade. It's going to be really tough during the tribulation period. And that's why the martyrs and death of Christians, as he controls over them, which it specifically talks about, that he has total power over the saints in verse 7 that we read. And then he goes on to say that he will ultimately, people are going to be killed ultimately by him, because he's going to have total power, and he's going to be a beast. He's going to be evil. He's going to do evil acts around the world. Then he goes into it and he says, verse 17. We're going to jump into that. So 17 basically deals with this harlot system, where it starts out. And this harlot is riding upon this beast. And this beast ultimately is a satanically controlled final empire that's going to rise up. I believe it's going to most likely be at least the UK and the United States and Canada, maybe New Zealand and so forth. They're going to be a part of this. That's my take on Arizona. Ultimately, this beast system is going to control the world economically and militarily. It's going to be very powerful. But it's going to rise up. It's going to be a very short period of time. So our focus is that saying, okay, this harlot, or this global religious system, which is going to ultimately point to the worship of the Antichrist. It's going to be writing about, so it's going to have a global religious element to it, but it's also going to have a military and an actual political one as well. And it just goes on to say that, and the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and 10 horns, the beast that you saw was and is not and is about to come up out of the abyss will go to his destruction. Well, who comes up out of the abyss? Well, Apollyon will come up out of the abyss. Again, it's the one who's embodying and empowering this, most likely this Antichrist figure. He's in essence possessed satanically, demonically as well, because we do know that demons come out of him, where it talks about that as well in, I think it's chapter 16, I believe. But anyway, it goes on and says that we want to focus on verses 11 and 12. It says, the beast was and is not, is himself also an 8th, and is one of the 7, and he goes to his destruction. And it says that the 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but they receive authority as kings with the beast for 1 hour. These have one purpose, and they give their power and authority to the beast. So this beast is going to come on the scene. He's going to ultimately be one of the 7. If you read down, we don't have time here, but as you read down through it, it says basically this beast, this Antichrist figure, is going to be one of the 7, and then ultimately he will overthrow 3, and then these kings, these other ones, are going to give their power. These 10 kings originally are going to give their power to him, and then he's going to overthrow 3 of them, those 3 that give their power to him. And so it's going to be a 10 king-led nation, maybe 10 nations potentially, and he overthrows 3 of them somehow. But ultimately, in this coalition of 10, he's going to be the dominant leader of the whole thing, and that is going to be who the Antichrist is. But he's going to get total power for the final 3.5 years of this tribulation of 7 years. So how this plays out in that 3-year period of time, 3.5-year period of time, when he gains total dominance and power and control. But so we should expect to see a guy come on the scene who's going to be involved in this peace agreement. He's going to ultimately lead up a 10-nation, 10-leader coalition that ultimately he will be one of the nations and one of its leaders of that nation, and he will become the preeminent leader and preeminent power, which is why I think the United States is that power, because right now they are the military superpower of the world. And if they need an economic transformation and they started a new alliance and coalition, the United States will most likely be the head or leader of that coalition and alliance. It just makes sense right now, and that's why I think it's going to be, it perfectly fits in with that situation. Who are those final 10 nations? Still to be seen, but I think it's very near. But ultimately, we should expect to see this coalition of 10 soon, real soon. And I think the economics of the world is driving that, ultimately, the rise of this final 10-nation leader. So we have him leading that up, and then ultimately what it says is that he deceives the nations, come down to a valley of judgment, and then when they're there to fight against the King of Kings, Lord of Lords, Jesus Christ, in return. So he's going to basically tell them it's probably some kind of invasionary force from another planet, who knows, some aliens from another dimension, who knows, but they'll believe it, they'll accept the lie, and then ultimately their armies will come there to fight against this invasionary force, but they don't realize it's actually the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, maybe God himself who's coming back, and they will instantaneously be put to death. And in verses 19 and 20, it just says, and I saw the beast and the kings of the earth and their armies assembled to make war against him who sat on the horse and against his army, previously stated as Jesus Christ. And the beast was seized, and with him his false prophet, who performed signs in his presence, by which they had deceived those who have received the mark of the beast and those who have worshipped its image. And these two were thrown alive into the lake of fire, which burns with brimstone. And the rest were killed with the sword that came out of the mouth of him who sits on the horse, and all the birds were filled with their flesh. So, and the sword obviously is a reference back to the word of God being spoken, and that he's going to rule the nations of the world with a rod of iron. Again, going back to Psalm 2. So that's ultimately the demise of the Antichrist, and that he'll be killed, but without human agency, exactly how we started. from Daniel chapter 8 when it says that he will ultimately be destroyed, but not from human agency in Daniel 8:25. That's how I see it being played out from beginning to end, and I think it's very near. I think Jared Kushner fits that role right now. We need to keep an eye on him, and if things continue, when they start talking about a 7-year peace agreement or a 7-year element to the peace agreement that they're currently talking about, and if he announces a run for the presidency, which very well could happen after the midterm elections, those are the things that to me would be very telling if it is in fact him. If it's not, if it's somebody else, then hey, we'll deal with that when the time comes, and maybe we'll need to change it. But in my opinion, he's the guy right now. So anyway, hope this is a blessing to you. God bless. Be safe. Keep looking up. I think the time's very short.